I'm Nora Bennett, 33, and last Thanksgiving, I learned there's a special kind of silence that follows when your own sister asks you to pretend you're someone else. 3 days before the holiday, Emily called from Manhattan and suggested I call myself a climate control consultant instead of what I actually am. I said yes because peace comes easier than pride when family is involved. On Thursday, I drove to her polished colonial in Westchester with a dress on a hanger and a knot in my stomach. By the time the doorbell began chiming with early arrivals from her firm, I could feel the air tighten like a vent about to shut. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever been asked to downplay who you are to make someone else comfortable, tap that like and subscribe so this story reaches the people who might need it. I grew up in a narrow, drafty house over my dad's shop, a place that smelled faintly of copper laundry soap and the coffee he stretched to the last scoop, and I learned early that you treat people the same, whether they own a tower downtown or a trailer by the river. Dad Thomas Bennett was a plumber who never left a job without running the water twice and wiping his fingerprints off the fixtures, and he used to say that a good name is worth more than a fancy title. When other kids rolled their eyes at work boots and calluses, he would shrug and remind us that steady hands have built more futures than sharp tongues ever will. We weren't rich, but there was heat in winter fans in summer, and a small envelope on the mantel marked "Rainy Day," which he touched every Sunday before church like a promise. There's a kind of dignity in that rhythm, and it stuck to me the way metal filings cling to a magnet. When I finished high school, I chose the shop floor over a lecture hall, and I never felt smaller for it until Emily started law school, and our world split like a log under a clean axe. I built Bennett Climate Systems, one truck at a time, then a second, then a small fleet showing up at dawn to measure duct runs and staying late to walk clients through maintenance schedules with a pencil and a calendar. We learned to speak the language of big buildings, pressure tonnage redundancy, and kept the lights humming and air balanced in places where a quiet system is the only sign you've done your job right. There's a satisfaction in watching a crew take pride in a perfect install, in knowing the building will breathe because your people did good work. By the time I signed my first 7-figure annual maintenance agreement, I'd learned to wear steel-toe boots with a blazer and keep my hair pulled back so it didn't snag on ladder springs. Emily landed at Whitaker & Row, a world of glass walls and quiet floors where the coffee machines whisper and reception desks look like sculpture. She started speaking in deadlines, measured by closing bells and partners' calendars. And when she visited for Sunday dinner, I caught the way her sentences tightened when Dad asked about her week. He loved us evenly, but he didn't pretend we were the same, and there was comfort in that until he got sick, and the house turned into a maze of appointments and pill bottles lined up like little soldiers. On one of those late nights when the clock seemed to hover, he asked me to look after Emily, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. A promise made in a dim kitchen is still a promise when the sun comes back up. I've kept that promise in ways that don't show from the street, because love that keeps score isn't love I recognize, but I also learned that help can become a mask if you hand it over every time someone wants to look taller. The gap between our worlds grew in small ways at first, like when Emily's friends would ask what I do, and she would answer before I could speak, smoothing the edges of my job until it sounded glossy. At family gatherings, she liked to stand near a window with a drink held just so, and when she laughed with her colleagues on speakerphone, I would hear words like optics and alignment and feel the space between us turn measured and careful. We both wanted to make Dad proud, and somehow that simple goal wore 2 different outfits and stood in 2 different rooms. That last week of November, Emily called with the dress code conversation, and I heard the strain beneath her cheerful tone, the way you hear a belt start to squeal in a hard-worked motor. Climate control consultant would land better with her partners, she said, and I replied that I could manage it for a day. I laid the navy dress across my back seat and drove down the parkway past trees holding their final leaves, thinking about how rooms can make a person feel either at home or on probation. Her street was studded with wreaths and white lights, and her porch smelled faintly of cinnamon, but when she opened the door, the first thing she noticed were my jeans. I'd brought the dress to change into the same way I bring a clean pair of gloves to swap before a final client walkthrough, but it didn't loosen the set of her mouth. Inside, everything gleamed silver on the sideboard flowers, with stems cut to the same length, framed photos arranged so precisely they looked measured. As I slipped into the guest bath to change, I heard drawers open and close, chairs nudge closer to the table, and the hush of Emily's voice as she practiced names under her breath. When I came out, Aunt Diane was by the window, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes taking in more than she said, and she gave me a small, steady smile that landed like a hand on my shoulder. The house looked ready for a magazine photo, but standing there, I felt the difference between polished and welcoming, the way you can feel when a system is balanced, but the air still runs cold. By mid-afternoon, the first associates arrived with perfect coats and careful shoes, and Emily's laugh rose an octave I didn't recognize, bright as glass. She introduced me to a young man whose handshake lasted exactly 2 seconds, and to a woman who complimented the table before asking where I consult, and I kept my answers short, the way you do when you're checking a thermostat with a guest watching. Someone mentioned that Stephen Whitaker himself might stop by for a drink, and the room seemed to tilt not from his name, but from the way Emily's smile pinned itself in place when she repeated it. I stood near the kitchen door, listening to a conversation about a merger that sounded like a chess game, and timed my breathing with the slow tick of the grandfather clock so I didn't fill the wrong space. The bell rang again, deeper this time, and the front hall filled with the hush that precedes judgment when people who matter step inside. I smoothed the skirt of the navy dress and felt the familiar steadiness that comes before a system test. The count to 3 you do before you flip a breaker and watch for the right lights to glow. Voices softened, chairs slid back, and a pair of sharp professional shoes stopped just shy of the rug where I stood. Emily's hand found my elbow, with the smallest press a warning and a plea wrapped into one. Then the man everyone had been waiting for turned toward me, and for a breath the room held still as if somewhere a vent had closed and trapped the quiet in place. The man everyone had been waiting for stepped into the room tall and composed, with the kind of stillness that made people listen without him saying a word. Emily greeted him like she'd rehearsed it bright, smile, careful posture, voice just a touch higher than usual. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm so honored you could make it." Her tone was reverent, almost like she was meeting royalty. Then she turned to me with that same tight smile she used at client dinners, the one that never reached her eyes. "This is my sister Nora," she said quickly. "She works in the technical sector." Stephen Whitaker's handshake was firm, deliberate. "Nice to meet you, Nora. Have we crossed paths before?" His gaze lingered, a flicker of curiosity in his expression. "I don't think so," I said. "I work mostly on the operations side." Emily jumped in before I could say more. "Yes, she manages system installations. Very hands-on." Her tone turned almost apologetic, as if hands-on were something to hide. "Yeah." Whitaker nodded politely and moved on toward the living room where the partners had gathered. I watched Emily exhale, shoulders dropping in relief, and realized that my presence tonight was something she'd been bracing for. The next hour unfolded like a carefully scripted play. Emily floated between guests, pouring wine, adjusting napkins, complimenting dresses. Every laugh sounded a little too perfect. I stood near the doorway, refilling the appetizer trays and watching the rhythm of the evening from a safe distance. Aunt Diane joined me for a moment, her voice low. "She's working hard to impress them," she whispered. I nodded, but the word hard didn't quite cover it. Emily wasn't hosting a family holiday. She was auditioning for a different life. When the cocktail chatter began to blend into background hum, a younger man from the firm, Daniel Hart if I remembered right, wandered over. He was polite, smiling the way people do when they're trying to fill a silence. "So technical sector, huh?" he asked. "What kind of work?" I hesitated, the question simple but loaded. "Heating and cooling systems," I said finally. "Commercial buildings mostly." His eyes brightened with understanding. "Oh, like engineering." Before I could answer, Emily appeared beside me, quick and controlled. "She's more of a repair specialist," she said, laughing lightly. "She keeps things running when they break down. Very practical work." Daniel's smile tightened, polite but distant, and after a few words about how important that kind of job is, he excused himself to rejoin the others. Emily turned to me, lowering her voice. "Please, Nora, just keep it simple tonight." "Simple," I repeated quietly. "You mean honest?" She sighed. "You know what I mean. I don't think I do. It's just one night. These people come from a different world. They won't understand." Her words settled between us like dust after a demolition. I wanted to tell her that I'd spent years learning to understand other worlds, corporate clients, government contracts, commercial bids. But none of it mattered here. In this room, my work uniform had become invisible even when I wasn't wearing it. The first dinner call came at 4. The table shimmered under soft, light, polished silver, folded napkins shaped like fans' crystal glasses, catching gold reflections from the chandelier. Emily placed me near the far end closest to the kitchen. "In case we need anything," she said quickly, pretending it was convenience, not distance. I smiled and took my seat. Conversation rose and fell like waves. The partners discussed mergers, new legislation, property portfolios. Every few minutes, someone laughed at a half-whispered joke about tax codes or real estate markets. I chewed quietly, half listening, half measuring the air temperature out of habit, noticing how warm the room felt despite the chill outside. Then Stephen Whitaker set down his wine glass and turned toward me. "Ms. Bennett," he said, voice cutting through the chatter. "Forgive me, but I keep thinking I've seen your name before. Bennett Climate Systems, does that ring a bell?" The room stilled. Emily's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate. That's just a coincidence," she stammered. "Nora does small residential work, family homes." I opened my mouth, but she gave me a sharp look that stopped me cold. I'd seen that expression before back when Dad was sick, and she didn't want the hospital staff to know we couldn't afford a private room. Mr. Whitaker's brow furrowed. "I'm sure I've seen that company name on a proposal." He looked at me again, studying my face. "Weren't you one of the bidders on the Hartley project downtown?" A faint murmur passed through the table. Someone cleared their throat. Emily's knuckles went white around her napkin. "I think you must be mistaken," she said quickly. I set my fork down carefully, the metal cool against my fingers. "No," I said, my voice steady. "That was us." Silence rippled down the table like a dropped glass rolling to a stop. "You own Bennett Climate Systems?" Whitaker asked. "Yes. We've handled HVAC design and installation for about 60 commercial buildings so far." Daniel's head jerked up from across the table. "Wait, you mean the same Bennett Climate Systems that did the Whitaker and Rowe retrofit last year?" Emily's voice sliced in. "Please, everyone, can we just—" But it was too late. Mr. Whitaker smiled faintly, impressed. "You have quite the reputation in our industry, Ms. Bennett. Excellent service, punctual, thorough reports. My facilities manager speaks very highly of your team." Emily's face drained of color. No, that can't be right," she murmured. She's just what I asked quietly." The silence that followed was almost kind at first, as if everyone hoped she wouldn't finish the sentence. But Emily did. "You're just a technician." The word hung in the air, too sharp to take back. Mr. Whitaker leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "A technician who apparently runs a multi-million-dollar operation," he said. "I'd hardly call that just anything." A faint flush crept up Emily's neck. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "It's just people exaggerate online. You know, I don't want anyone misunderstanding." I pushed my chair back slowly. "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "You wanted me to stay quiet so you wouldn't have to explain me. I get it." Emily's composure cracked for the first time all evening. "Nora, please, not here." "Why not here?" I asked softly. "You wanted everyone to know what kind of person I am. Let's make sure they really do." Across the table, Aunt Diane's voice came low and steady. "Emily," she said enough. But Emily's pride was a wildfire by then, too hot to contain. "You think you can come in here and show off," she snapped. "This dinner isn't about you. You're trying to embarrass me in front of my colleagues." I stared at her, the sister I'd once promised to protect, and saw someone I barely recognized, afraid defensive grasping at a mask that had begun to slip. Around us no one moved. Even the clinking silver had gone still. I rose from my seat, smoothing the skirt of that borrowed dignity she'd asked me to wear. "You don't have to worry," I said. "You won't be embarrassed by me again." Her mouth twisted, half relief, half confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out soon enough." I reached for my purse, sliding a small envelope inside before lifting it from the floor. "Enjoy your dinner, Emily." Aunt Diane's eyes met mine, calm and certain, and she gave a slight nod that said it was time. I walked toward the doorway, every step measured, every sound amplified, the chair legs scraping the soft rustle of my dress, the faint hum of the vent above. Behind me, Emily started to speak, but the words broke apart before they reached me. In the foyer, I paused to put on my coat. The hallway mirror caught my reflection, face, pale eyes clear. Through the doorway, voices began to rise again, confusion, whispers, the soft panic of a gathering that had lost its rhythm. I glanced once toward Aunt Diane. She was watching me go, one hand on her wineglass expression, unreadable but firm. When I stepped outside, the night air bit my skin sharp and clean. The porch light hummed overhead, and somewhere behind me, a laugh echoed nervously before cutting off. The sky had that flat gray color that comes before snow, and for the first time all evening, I could breathe. I started toward my car, but stopped at the end of the walkway, a thought anchoring me in place. I reached for my phone and typed a brief message to Marcus Lee, my CFO, 5 words only, simple and clear. When I hit send, a sense of finality settled over me, quiet but absolute. Behind me, the house glowed with warmth, a perfect picture for anyone passing by. But inside, I knew a storm had started that no one would be able to contain. By the time I reached my car, the air had turned sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the faint hum of laughter spilling from other homes down the street. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands still on my phone, watching my breath fog the windshield. The message to Marcus had already gone through, simple and direct, begin the review first thing Monday. There was nothing else to add. I started the engine and eased away from the curb, the sound of tires on cold asphalt the only noise cutting through the quiet. The drive home took less than an hour, but every light and shadow on that route felt heavier than usual. Somewhere between the toll plaza and my exit, I replayed the dinner, the startled faces, the silence after I spoke my company's name, the way Emily's voice cracked when she said the word technician. It wasn't anger that sat with me on that ride. It was the dull ache of recognition, the moment you realize someone you love has been ashamed of you for a very long time. When I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light flicked on, washing the front of my small Colonial in gold. I sat there another minute before getting out. Inside the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows long days and heavier thoughts. I hung up my coat and walked into my office, a room lined with blueprints and contract binders, the walls a gallery of framed permits and awards my crew insisted on hanging. On the desk sat a photo of Dad at one of his job sites, grinning with a wrench in his hand and a smudge of grease across his cheek. That picture had been taken a week before he went into hospice. I could still hear his voice, low and ragged, when he'd asked me to promise him one last thing: take care of your sister. I hadn't realized then what that would mean. Emily was in her first year of law school at the time, buried in tuition bills, and terrified she wouldn't finish. The funeral expenses had emptied what little Dad left, and there wasn't enough left over to keep her afloat. So I sold my car, cashed out my savings, and used the money to start a trust in her name anonymous through a banker friend of Aunt Diane's. Every month since a transfer left my account. Tuition books, exam fees, even her rent deposit that first winter, she almost had to move out. For 7 years, the payments went out like clockwork, $3,500 on the first of every month, hidden beneath layers of paperwork and good intentions. She never knew. She thought it was some forgotten life insurance fund or a scholarship Dad had applied for before he died. I let her believe it because the truth didn't matter if it helped her stand. That's what I told myself. I walked over to the window, looking out at the bare trees lining my yard. Their branches rattled softly in the wind, thin and stubborn against the cold. I remembered every overtime job I'd taken to keep those payments steady, industrial contracts where the air stung with chemicals, mechanical rooms so hot it hurt to breathe, rooftops slick with ice, while I checked failing units before dawn. I'd built my company from those nights, turning fatigue into focus one invoice at a time. Emily had been the reason I worked 18-hour days. She'd been the reason I'd skipped vacations, postponed dating, put everything else on hold. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. Aunt Diane stood there wrapped in her wool coat, her cheeks flushed from the drive. "You didn't think I'd let you end the night alone, did you?" she said, stepping inside. I gestured toward the couch, and she sat with a sigh, setting her gloves on the coffee table. "I left after you did. Things didn't calm down. What happened?" She kept talking. Diane said quietly, trying to explain it away, pretending she'd been protecting you. But everyone in that room saw what really happened. You didn't embarrass her, Nora. She did that to herself. I sat beside her, folding my hands. "She won't see it that way." "Not tonight," she said, "but give it time. The truth doesn't change just because someone refuses to look at it." We sat in silence for a while, the clock ticking softly in the background. When she finally spoke again, her voice had softened. "You know your father never meant for that promise to become your burden. He wanted you to look out for her, yes, but not to carry her on your back." "I know. Then maybe it's time you stopped paying for her mistakes." Her words landed like a small echo of something I'd been trying not to admit. I walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder. The trust documents, every receipt, every payment record. "I've been keeping track," I said, handing it to her. Diane glanced through the pages, nodding slowly. "You've done enough. More than enough." The weight of the night pressed down again, heavy but steady this time. "She's going to hate me," I said. "She already does," Diane replied gently. "But that's because she doesn't understand yet what she owes you. Sooner or later she will." I poured us each a cup of coffee and sat back down. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering dry leaves across the porch. For the first time in years, I let myself consider what it would feel like to stop. To stop sending money. To stop pretending my sister's shame was something I needed to fix. It was almost midnight when Diane stood to leave. At the door, she turned and looked at me the way she used to when I was a teenager and thought the world rested on my shoulders. "Sometimes the best way to keep a promise," she said, "is to let the person learn how to walk without you." After she left, I stayed up sorting through old emails, contract renewals, payroll reports, project schedules. The folder marked Whitman Family Trust sat open beside me. 7 years, 120 transfers, everyone signed with my name. I ran my finger along the edge of the last document, the way you test a blade before cutting something clean. At 1 a.m, I finally shut down my computer. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was solid, like something rebuilt. I stood by the window again, watching snow start to fall, thin and quiet, the flakes catching the light from the street lamp. Somewhere across the river, Emily was probably still surrounded by what was left of her guests, piecing together excuses, rehearsing explanations. I knew her well enough to imagine the panic behind the smile. I turned off the lamp and headed upstairs. On the nightstand sat the same navy dress I'd worn to dinner, now folded neatly. The faint scent of perfume still clung to it, mixed with the sharper smell of kitchen spices and tension. I laid it across the chair and switched off the light. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind circled back to Dad, to the years we'd spent side by side in his workshop, to the hum of pipe cutters and the smell of fresh solder. He'd believed that effort and loyalty were enough to hold a family together. I wanted to believe that too. But lying there in the dark, I began to understand that sometimes loyalty means knowing when to step away. By morning, my phone buzzed with messages. Marcus confirming the review had been initiated, Maria asking if she should prepare new contract drafts, and one short note from Diane: "Be ready. The truth has a way of catching up faster than you think." I stared at those words for a long moment before replying with a single line: "I'm done hiding." The day outside was pale and cold, sunlight barely breaking through the gray. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. On the screen, rows of numbers and documents waited clean and precise. For 7 years, I'd been the silent benefactor, the invisible sister. That chapter was ending. Before closing the laptop, I opened one last file, a copy of the Educational Trust contract. My name was listed as administrator, hers as beneficiary. I scrolled to the end and hovered over the section labeled Termination Clause. It required only one signature. I didn't sign it yet. Not then. but I knew I would. Soon. The house was still the only sound, the soft hum of the furnace turning on. I sat there, letting the warmth fill the space, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of the promise I'd made. I felt something lighter, sharper, like the beginning of a boundary taking shape. Outside, the snow continued to fall thin as dust. In a few hours, it would cover everything: driveways, rooftops, the marks left behind by last night's footsteps. But underneath the ground would still remember where each step had been. Monday morning arrived gray and quiet, the kind of morning that sits heavy in the sky. I was at the office early, long before the rest of the staff arrived. The warehouse lights hummed to life one by one, revealing neat rows of tools, steel ducting, and boxes stacked waist-high. It was the same space where my company had started 9 years ago, with just one borrowed truck and a rented workbench. Now it held 36 vehicles and an operation that stretched across the state. I stood there for a moment, letting the familiarity steady me before walking into my office. Marcus Lee was already there, sleeves rolled up, a cup of coffee balanced on a stack of files. "You wanted the full review ready first thing," he said, sliding a folder across my desk. "It's all here. Every active contract cross-referenced for potential conflicts." "Good," I said. "Start with Whitaker and Rowe." He nodded, flipping open a binder thick with paperwork. "They're one of our largest accounts. Annual maintenance plus emergency response for their downtown properties, worth about $5 million a year. And the Hartley project." "That's still pending," he said. "We're on the short list. If we land it, it'll double the contract value." He paused, watching me carefully. "Do you want to proceed with the review we discussed?" "Yes," I said. "Every clause, every renewal. If there's a conflict of interest, I want it documented." He gave a low whistle. "Something tells me Thanksgiving didn't go well." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out the window at the line of trucks in the lot, each one with our logo printed clean and straight across the doors. "Let's just say it's time we start setting boundaries." He nodded once. "Understood." While Marcus got to work, I opened my email and saw a message from Aunt Diane. "Checking in. Hope you're steady. Remember, truth has a way of finding daylight." I smiled faintly and typed back a short reply. "It's starting." The morning passed in a blur of numbers and signatures. Maria brought in invoices for the month Mike came by with site updates, and my foreman's easy humor kept the crew moving. It was an ordinary day in every visible way, but beneath it all, I felt something shifting. Every document I signed, every phone call I made, pulled me closer to a decision I'd avoided for too long. Around noon, I called Marcus into my office. "I need to prepare a formal letter for Whitaker and Rowe," I said. "A notice of review under our conflict clause. Use standard legal language. Nothing emotional. Just the facts." He hesitated. "You sure you want to do this now?" "It'll cause ripples." "It already has," I said. "I just need them on paper." By late afternoon, the draft was complete. Marcus handed it to me for signature, his pen poised beside the page. The document was straightforward: 30 days' notice to review the partnership for ethical conflicts, citing public conduct that could impact our professional relationship. Nothing personal, but clear enough to sting. I signed it in 2 places, then leaned back in my chair. "Send it tomorrow morning," I said. Hand-delivered. Marcus gathered the papers, but before leaving, he paused at the door. "You've been quiet since Thanksgiving," he said carefully. "You want to tell me what happened?" I met his eyes, debating how much to share. Let's just say I was reminded who I really am and who I'm not. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then maybe that's a good thing. When he left, the office felt unusually still. Outside, snow had begun to fall soft and slow, coating the trucks in a thin white film. I stood there watching it, thinking about the last 7 years, every payment sent, every late-night phone call to Emily when she needed money for another expense she couldn't explain. I'd told myself it was love, that keeping my promise to Dad was what mattered most. But standing there, I realized that love without respect turns into something smaller, something that eats away at you piece by piece. That evening, Aunt Diane came by the shop again. She had 2 mugs of hot cider in hand, and a look that said she already knew what I'd done. "You sent the notice?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," I said. She nodded approvingly. "Good. She's been leaning on your silence for too long." We sat in the corner of my office, steam curling up from our cups. "Do you think she'll call?" I asked. "She will when the firm gets that notice," Diane said. "Emily's whole world depends on the illusion that she's in control. Once that cracks, she'll reach for the person she's always counted on you." "I won't answer," I said. "Not yet," she agreed. When people like Emily are forced to see what they've done, their first instinct isn't apology, it's damage control. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rattled against the glass, and somewhere in the warehouse a truck door slammed. Diane sipped her cider and set the mug down gently. "You've given her years of your life, Nora. You've done your duty. Whatever comes next, it's hers to face." That night, after she left, I sat alone in my office until the lights dimmed automatically. The silence felt different now, not heavy, just certain. I opened the drawer again and took out the folder with the trust paperwork. The edges were soft from being handled so often. Inside were the bank records, notarized letters, and a single-page summary from the attorney who had helped me set it up. Her name was Patricia Long, an old friend of Dad's who'd managed his estate. She'd always told me to keep everything documented, even if I hoped I'd never need it. I stared at the line near the bottom of the summary, the one that read, "Administrator Nora Bennett." That single sentence carried every sacrifice, every hour I'd spent trying to protect Emily from a reality she never appreciated. I thought of Dad again, the way he used to say that fairness wasn't always kindness. He'd understood something I hadn't, that protecting someone too long only teaches them how to take. By midnight, I'd made up my mind. Tomorrow wasn't just about contracts or legal language, it was about ending a pattern. I printed one more letter, this one addressed to the trustee's office, formally closing the Whitman Education Fund. The words felt final in a way that frightened me and freed me all at once. When I sealed the envelope, I sat back and looked around my office. The framed licenses, the photo of our first company truck, the little bronze wrench Dad had given me the day I opened the business. Everything here had been built by work that no one saw as glamorous, but it was real and it was mine. At 6 a.m., I dropped the 2 envelopes into the outgoing mail tray, one for Whitaker and Rowe, one for the trust. The sound they made hitting the metal bin was small, but it echoed through me. Later that morning, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Marcus stopped by my door again. "Deliveries confirmed," he said. "Whitaker's office signed for it 10 minutes ago." I nodded. "Then it's done." He hesitated. "You might want to brace yourself," he said gently. "They'll realize what this means before your sister does." "I know," I said. "Let them." When he left, I turned toward the window. The snow had stopped leaving the world clean and bright, every rooftop shining in the sun. I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. By afternoon, the firm would be calling, and by evening, Emily would have read the fine print for herself. I didn't know exactly how she'd react, rage, denial, maybe tears, but I knew one thing. This time, I wouldn't soften the edges for her. The next move was hers. The clock on my desk ticked quietly toward noon. Somewhere out there, a chain of events was beginning that neither of us could stop, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. The first call came 2 days later, just before noon. I was in the middle of reviewing bids when my phone lit up with Emily's name. For a long moment, I just watched it ring, her photo frozen on the screen, a picture from years ago when she was still in law school and full of light. It stopped after 4 rings. A minute later, it rang again. This time I answered. Her voice came through sharp, brittle. "Nora, what is this? I assume you got the notice. The firm just received a letter from your office about a conflict of interest. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," I said. She gave a harsh laugh, the kind that hides panic. "You can't just terminate a $5 million contract because you're mad at me. That's not how business works." "It's not about being mad," I replied. "It's about professionalism. My company won't maintain the climate systems for a firm where an associate publicly disrespected its owner. It's a conflict, plain and simple." Her voice cracked. "You're doing this to punish me. I'm doing this because I finally learned the difference between helping and enabling." There was a long silence on the line, the kind that feels like something breaking. Then she whispered, "They're talking about letting me go. I'm not responsible for that." I said quietly. You don't understand, she said, voice rising. This could destroy my career. Emily, I said I built mine from nothing. You'll survive. I heard her inhale sharply, then the click of disconnection. The call left a quiet that hummed in my ears for the rest of the day. I didn't tell Marcus or the team. There was no need. They already knew the letter had done its job. That evening, Aunt Diane called. She reached out to me. She said, her tone steady but tired. She's panicking. I figured she would. She says you're ruining her life. She's been living off mine for 7 years, I said. Diane was silent for a moment. You're not wrong, but remember, truth doesn't land softly. She'll fight it before she accepts it. I'm ready for that, I said. The next few days passed in a blur. The firm called twice asking to discuss the termination. I told Marcus to handle it. By Thursday, Whitaker himself requested a meeting. I agreed more out of respect than obligation. He arrived at our main office that afternoon, gray coat dusted with snow. Marcus showed him into the conference room where I waited. Whitaker's expression was calm, but drawn the look of a man trying to mend a bridge that had already burned. Ms. Bennett, he said, taking a seat, I appreciate you seeing me. Of course. He set his leather folder on the table. I've reviewed the notice. Legally, you're within your rights, but I'd like to understand if there's any room to reconsider. There isn't, I said gently. This isn't about money, it's about boundaries. He nodded slowly. I respect that. For what it's worth, I was deeply disappointed by how your sister handled herself at that dinner. That kind of arrogance doesn't go unnoticed. His words caught me off guard. So you heard about that? He gave a small smile. News travels fast in my firm, and integrity matters here. You've been a valued partner for years, and I want to make sure you know her behavior doesn't reflect our values. I appreciate that, I said. He stood buttoning his coat. If there's ever a chance to rebuild that relationship, I hope you'll let me know. Not for her sake, for ours. When he left, the quiet in the room felt heavier, but cleaner. Marcus lingered by the door. That went better than I expected. He's a reasonable man, I said. And he's already decided what to do about her. Marcus gave a slow nod. Then I'd say the message got through. That evening, when I finally got home, I found an envelope wedged under my door. My name was scrawled in rushed handwriting, Emily's. Inside were 2 pages written in ink that smudged in places where tears must have fallen. She wrote that she'd been called into a partner review, that Whitaker had told her she'd embarrassed the firm and compromised a key relationship. She'd been given 2 options, take a temporary leave or face termination. She blamed me for both. At the bottom, her handwriting trailed off into a plea. You were supposed to take care of me, not destroy me. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the counter. For a long time, I stood there, hands resting on the cool granite, the kitchen silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia Long. She answered on the second ring. Nora, I was just about to call you. I received your letter about closing the trust. It's official, I asked. As of this afternoon, the account is frozen and the remaining funds will be returned to your business account within 7 days. Thank you. Patricia hesitated. Emily called my office. She found out about the trust. I closed my eyes. What did you tell her? Only the truth that the trust was administered by you per your father's directive and that every payment was documented. She was stunned. I'm not surprised, I said quietly. She asked if it could be reinstated, and I told her no. You terminated it legally and permanently. I think that's when she realized the safety net is gone. When I hung up, the house felt impossibly still. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, covering the street in white. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about the silence between us. I'd done what Dad asked. I'd kept my promise for 7 years. The rest was up to her now. The next morning, Maria came into my office holding a stack of newspapers. You might want to see this, she said. On the business page was a short article, Whitaker and Rowe, associate, under review after public dispute with local business owner. It didn't name me directly, but the description left no doubt who it referred to. Maria frowned. She's getting dragged online. Let it run its course, I said. Later that afternoon, Marcus came in with a small grin. We just got the Hartley contract. 5 years, $50 million. I leaned back, letting the words settle. That's good news. Better than good, he said. It means expansion. 2 new offices, maybe 3. You've earned this, Nora. I smiled faintly. We all have. When he left, I stood by the window watching the city below fade into dusk. The streetlights flickered on one by one, and for a moment everything looked calm, even beautiful. But I knew the calm was temporary. Emily's world was unraveling, and soon the calls would start again, calls filled with blame or maybe apology. I didn't know which would hurt more. That night, Aunt Diane called again. "Your sister showed up at my house," she said softly. "She's a mess, crying, begging me to talk to you. And I told her what your father would have told her, that respect is earned, not demanded. She needs to sit with this for a while." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." "She'll try again," Diane warned gently. "Be ready." "I am," I said. After the call, I went upstairs and sat at my desk. The city was quiet outside my window, snow still falling in soft waves. I opened my laptop, pulled up the last email from Patricia, and reread the confirmation of the trust closure. Then I opened a blank document and began typing something I hadn't written in years. A personal letter, not to Emily this time, but to Dad. I told him I'd kept my word, that I'd carried his promise as far as I could, and that it was time to lay it down. When I finished, I saved it and closed the computer. The room was dim, the only light coming from the lamp on my desk. I sat there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the snow against the window. By morning, the silence would break. But for now, it was enough to sit in it, knowing that every choice I'd made, every document signed, every boundary drawn, had finally brought me back to solid ground. It was a week before Christmas when everything finally collapsed. I arrived at the office early that Monday, coffee in hand, when Marcus stepped into my doorway holding an envelope. "It's from Whitaker and Rowe," he said quietly. "Certified delivery." I set my coffee aside and took the letter. The firm's letterhead was crisp, formal, and cold. It contained exactly what I expected: confirmation that our contract was terminated, effective immediately, citing a strategic reorganization as the reason. Marcus watched me read it, his expression unreadable. "Guess they wanted to make it official before the holidays," he said. I folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. "It was coming either way," I said. "At least now the air's clear." He nodded slowly. "They'll regret it. Word's already spreading that we walked away, not the other way around." The day went on as if nothing had changed. Crews left for job sites, phones rang, orders went out. Only Maria seemed to sense the weight behind my calm. When she stopped by later, she placed a mug of tea on my desk and said softly, "Sometimes letting go is the only way something better can find its way in." Then she smiled and went back to work. By midweek, the ripple had reached its peak. The trade papers picked up a short piece about the firm losing its long-time maintenance provider, hinting at internal issues. Clients started calling curious sympathetic. One even said, "If Whitaker lost you, we'll take your whole team." That night, Marcus texted to say the Hartley contract had officially cleared. $50 million, 5 years nationwide expansion. The next morning, I found a voicemail from Stephen Whitaker himself. His tone was calm, deliberate. "Ms. Bennett, I wanted you to know that Emily is no longer with the firm. Her conduct during the past month made continued employment untenable. I wish you well in your future endeavors." There was no apology, no anger, just closure wrapped in professionalism. When I hung up, I sat still for a long moment, letting the words settle. She was out. Everything she'd built on my silence was gone. That evening, Aunt Diane called. "I heard from Stephen," she said. "He told me they let her go." "I know," I said quietly. "She's called me 3 times today. She doesn't know what to do next." "She'll have to figure it out," I said. "The trust is gone. The job's gone. Maybe that's what it takes for her to start over." "She's angry, Nora, angry and scared. She keeps saying you humiliated her. She humiliated herself," I said, then softened. "I don't want her to fall apart. I just can't keep holding her up." Diane sighed. "You've held her long enough. The week before Christmas is always the busiest time of year for us clients rushing to finish projects before winter break, contractors trying to close out accounts. But that year something felt different. The shop hummed with a steady rhythm, but underneath it, there was a sense of change, like air shifting before a storm. On Thursday, I was reviewing the new Hartley documents when Maria buzzed in. There's someone here asking for you, says she's family. My chest tightened. Send her in. Emily stepped into the doorway wearing a heavy wool coat, her eyes red and puffy. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of the last few weeks had carved something out of her. She stood there for a moment, clutching her gloves. I didn't know where else to go, she said quietly. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit down, she did, setting her gloves in her lap. They fired me, she said flatly. Stephen said I violated the firm's code of ethics, that I embarrassed the company. My name's been all over the legal blogs. I know, I said. She swallowed hard. My apartment lease ends next month. I don't have savings, Nora. I thought I'd have another paycheck. I don't even have enough for January rent. I stayed silent. Her voice broke. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know where to start. You start, I said evenly, by admitting that this isn't about me. Or the firm. It's about how you treated people who tried to help you. Tears welled in her eyes. I made mistakes. I know that, but I was trying to make Dad proud. He wanted more for us. Dad wanted us to have character, I said. He didn't care about titles or parties. He cared about honesty and respect. You forgot that somewhere along the way. She pressed her hands to her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I leaned forward, my voice steady. You meant every choice you made. But meaning and consequence are different things. You called me an embarrassment, Emily. You told people I fix air conditioners while you were taking money from the woman who built your career. Her shoulders shook. I didn't know. If I had known, you would have found a different excuse, I said quietly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the office filled the silence. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and slow. Finally, she whispered, Can you help me? Just until I get back on my feet? I looked at her, the same sister I'd carried for years. No, I said gently. Not this time. Her eyes widened, disbelief turning to hurt. You really mean that? I do, I said. You have to learn how to stand on your own. I've done my part. Now it's your turn. She stared at me for a long time, tears catching the light. I don't have anyone else. You have yourself, I said. That's enough if you start using it. She stood, pulling her coat tighter. I don't know how to forgive you for this. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I said. I'm asking for growth. For a moment, I thought she might say something more, but she just nodded, faintly turned, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat there for a while, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hall. Then I exhaled long and slow, the kind of breath that comes after years of holding one too long. That night, Aunt Diane stopped by. She came here, Diane said as soon as she saw my face. She did. How did it go? As well as it could, I said. She's on her own now. Diane nodded slowly. Maybe that's exactly what she needs. We sat together in the quiet for a while, the tree lights blinking softly in the corner. You know, Diane said your father used to say that some lessons only sink in when the world stops cushioning you. I think Emily's finally hit that point. I looked toward the window where snowflakes drifted past the glass like sparks in the dark. Then I hope she learns from it, I said. When Diane left, I stayed by the window long after she was gone. The city was wrapped in white, every rooftop softened, every sound muted. Somewhere out there, Emily was probably packing boxes, making phone calls, starting the long process of rebuilding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fix it for her. By morning, the headlines about the Whitaker fallout had faded, replaced by the next story. The firm had moved on. My company had grown stronger, and Emily, for all her anger, had been forced to look in the mirror without the safety net I'd built for her. The week ended quietly. On Friday, Marcus brought in a bottle of champagne, for the Hartley deal, he said, grinning, and for the peace of finally closing the old chapter. We raised our glasses, the team gathered around. The sound of their laughter filled the shop bright and full. It wasn't celebration in the loud sense, it was steady, earned joy. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway looking across the empty floor. The trucks gleamed under the dim security lights, ready for another day's work. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space, open, honest, and waiting for what came next. And as the snow began to fall again outside, I knew the next call I received wouldn't be about endings. It would be the beginning of something entirely new. January came quietly, the kind of cold that makes the morning stretch and the light slow to appear. Business was steady, the Hartley project moving faster than expected, and the shop buzzed with a sense of purpose. Yet beneath the rhythm of work, something in me had settled differently. The constant pull of guilt that once lived behind every decision had gone still. One evening after the crews left and the warehouse lights dimmed, I stayed behind to review quarterly reports. The sound of the heater filled the silence. That was when Maria poked her head through the doorway. "Someone's here for you," she said softly. She didn't want to wait in the lobby. I looked up, and before I could ask who, Emily stepped into the office. Her hair was tucked under a gray knit hat, her coat too light for the weather. She looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, hands trembling around a folder she clutched to her chest. "I know you said you didn't want to see me," she said quietly, "but I didn't know where else to go." I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Sit down." She hesitated, then took the seat, setting the folder carefully on the desk. "I found a job," she said, voice breaking on the word. "It's not much front desk at a small practice downtown. They don't pay well, but it's something." I nodded. "That's a start." She let out a shaky breath. "I wanted to bring you this." She opened the folder and slid several documents across the desk. They were receipts, old tuition statements, rent confirmations, transfers from the trust I'd closed, each one marked paid in full. "I've been going through everything," she said. "I didn't believe Aunt Diane when she told me. I thought there had to be some mistake. But then I saw your signature." Her voice cracked. "Every month for years." I said nothing. She pressed her hands flat against the papers, trying to steady them. "You kept me afloat. You let me believe it was from Dad. I told people he left me something and you never corrected me. You just kept paying. I made a promise," I said. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't about gratitude," I said quietly. "It was about giving you a chance to finish what you started. You were still his daughter." That was enough. She looked down, tears slipping onto the papers. "And I repaid you by calling you an embarrassment in front of half the firm." I didn't answer. "I thought success meant pretending I was someone better than where we came from," she whispered. "But I only ended up losing everything that mattered." The heater clicked off, leaving the room in stillness. For the first time, she didn't look angry or defensive, just tired, like she'd finally run out of places to hide. "I can't undo what I said," she continued. "And I know I don't deserve your help anymore. But I wanted to tell you that I'm done pretending. I'm starting over on my own." She stood, then slipping her gloves back on. "Thank you for everything you did, even when I didn't deserve it." I nodded once. "Take care of yourself, Emily." As she reached the doorway, she paused and looked back. "I'm sorry, Nora, for all of it." "I know," I said. "Just make it mean something." When she left, I sat in the quiet for a long time, staring at the folder she'd left behind. The papers were clean, precise, each number a small reminder of years spent carrying someone else's weight. I gathered them gently and placed them in the drawer beside Dad's photo. The next morning, Marcus walked in while I was finishing my coffee. "You look different," he said with a small smile. "Lighter. Maybe I am." He nodded toward the stack of files on my desk. "By the way, Hartley wants you at the ribbon cutting next week. They're bringing press." "Big exposure for us." I smiled faintly. "Good. It's time people start seeing what we've built." Later that afternoon, Maria knocked on my door again. "You might want to check your email," she said. Something came through from the City Development Office. It was an invitation Bennett Climate Systems had been nominated for the Regional Business Leadership Award. I stared at the screen for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. The nomination wasn't just about contracts or profits. It was about integrity, workforce training, and community investment, the very things Dad used to talk about when he said good work speaks louder than status. That evening, I called Aunt Diane to tell her. She laughed softly through the phone. "Your father would be proud," she said. "And maybe, just maybe, your sister's starting to understand what pride is supposed to feel like." "She came by yesterday," I said. "I know," Diane said. She called me afterward, said she felt like she'd finally told the truth for the first time in her life. I smiled faintly. Then maybe we're both finally free. In the days that followed, the office filled with small signs of growth. We hired 3 new technicians, all from a local trade program I'd started sponsoring in Dad's memory. The company logo went up on a new building downtown. Every time I saw it gleaming in the winter light, I thought about the long road that had led there, the sleepless nights, the quiet sacrifices, the boundaries learned too late, but held at last. On Friday afternoon, I walked through the shop as the crews packed up for the weekend. Mike waved from across the floor. "Boss, we got the last unit installed on the hospital project. That's one for the books." "Nice work," I said, smiling. When everyone had gone, I locked up and stood by the bay doors, watching the light fade across the snow. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. The world outside was still steady and somehow kind. That weekend, I visited Dad's grave with Aunt Diane. The sky was pale and quiet, the air cold enough to sting. I brushed the snow off the headstone and set down a small plaque, Bennett Climate Systems Community Leadership Award, engraved just last month. Diane stood beside me, hands tucked into her coat. "He'd like this," she said softly. I nodded. He taught me what it means to earn it. As we turned to leave, I looked toward the parking lot and saw a familiar figure standing by a car. Emily. She didn't approach, just raised a small wave. I returned it, a silent truce carried through the cold air. Then she got in her car and drove away. Diane touched my arm. "Maybe that's her way of saying she's finally listening." "Maybe," I said. We walked back through the snow, our footsteps soft against the ground. For the first time since that Thanksgiving night, I felt no anger, no lingering bitterness, just quiet understanding that some things take falling apart to be rebuilt right. When we reached the car, Diane glanced at me. "What now?" I smiled faintly. "Now I build the next chapter." The drive home was peaceful, the road lined with frost-tipped trees that glittered in the fading light. Ahead, the sky was turning pink over the horizon, soft and calm. It felt like the beginning of something, not revenge, not victory, just peace, finally settling where chaos used to live. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the porch light had come on, casting a warm glow against the snow. Inside the house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. I hung up my coat and looked around the quiet rooms that no longer felt too big or too empty. For the first time, I understood what Dad meant when he said, "Fairness isn't something you wait for, it's something you create." And in that moment, I knew the next part of my life wouldn't be about proving anything to anyone. It would be about living in the peace I'd finally earned. Still, as I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched the snow outside, one thought lingered gently at the edge of my mind. Tomorrow would bring something new. A letter, a call, maybe even a sign that closure had finally come full circle. Spring came slowly that year, the kind that doesn't arrive with a rush of color, but with quiet signs, the thaw of ice on the eaves, the hum of machinery waking up at the shop, the scent of new paint in the offices we'd just expanded. Bennett Climate Systems was larger than I'd ever dreamed. 200 employees had grown to 350, and we were preparing to open our first out-of-state branch. Every milestone should have felt like a victory, yet what stayed with me most wasn't the numbers. It was the peace that came from finally setting things right. One morning I arrived, early sunlight streaming through the windows, the city still half asleep. On my desk sat a small envelope with my name written in a familiar hand. I recognized it instantly, Emily's. There was no return address, just a single sheet of paper folded neatly inside. She wrote that she was still at the downtown practice, working full-time now. She'd paid off her last loan, moved into a modest apartment, and started volunteering on weekends at a community legal clinic. At the bottom of the letter she'd written, "I finally understand what Dad meant by earning your way. Thank you for giving me the space to learn it." I sat there for a long time reading those lines over again, my eyes catching on the small smudge where a drop of water had blurred the ink. Whether it was from her tears or mine, I couldn't tell. I picked up my phone, but didn't call. Sometimes silence holds more grace than words ever could. A week later, Aunt Diane stopped by the office carrying a cardboard box. "Cleaning out the attic," she said with a smile. Inside were old family photos, Dad in his work overalls, Emily and me covered in mud from the yard our mother before she left. Beneath them was an envelope yellowed with time, sealed in Dad's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter dated the week before he passed. He'd written, "If the girls ever lose sight of each other, remind them that family isn't measured by who's ahead. It's measured by who's willing to stand beside you when it's hard." The paper shook in my hands as I read it. After all that had happened, those words felt like both a benediction and a release. That Sunday, I drove to the cemetery alone. The air smelled of fresh rain, the ground soft underfoot. I laid a small bouquet at Dad's headstone and tucked his letter underneath the flowers. "We're okay now," I whispered. "It took a while, but we're finding our way." On the way home, I stopped at the corner cafe where he used to take us after school. The owner still remembered him. "Your father used to sit right there," she said, pointing to a booth by the window. I ordered his usual black coffee and an apple muffin and sat quietly watching the morning unfold. Outside, people hurried to work the city alive with movement. I realized that life rarely hands us clean resolutions. It gives us the chance to choose who we'll be when everything we built is tested. By summer, the company had been honored with the state's Community Leadership Award. We used the recognition to start a scholarship for trade apprentices, young people who reminded me of Dad building futures one honest job at a time. During the ceremony, as cameras flashed and speeches filled the room, I looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces: Marcus, Maria, Mike, Aunt Diane, and at the very back, Emily. She didn't wave or approach, just stood there, smiling, hands clasped in front of her. For the first time in years, her presence didn't carry tension. It carried peace. After the event, she left before I could reach her, but on the seat of my car, I found another envelope. Inside was a simple note: "Proud of you. Always have been. I just didn't know how to say it before." That night, I sat on the porch as the air cooled and the crickets started their evening chorus. The house was quiet, warm light spilling from the windows behind me. I thought about the long road that had led here, the anger, the exhaustion, the guilt that once felt endless. Somewhere along the way, forgiveness had arrived quietly, not as a grand gesture, but as a steady truth. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's love in a harder, wiser form. I learned that dignity doesn't come from titles or wealth, but from knowing you've lived your life with honesty. And most of all, I learned that family doesn't always mean closeness. Sometimes it means letting someone walk their own road until they're ready to meet you again somewhere in the middle. As the sky darkened, I raised my coffee cup toward the stars, a quiet toast to Dad, to Emily, and to the life I'd finally built on my own terms. The wind moved through the trees like a soft sigh, carrying the scent of spring. If you've ever had to choose peace over approval or rebuild yourself after being underestimated, I hope this story reminds you that it's worth it. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the steady voice that says enough. Thank you for listening. If this story found its way to you at the right time, take a moment to share it or leave a thought below. And wherever you are tonight, don't forget, there's honor in honest work and quiet power in choosing yourself.